What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Operators Podcast. This is episode 65. Today, we are talking about politics, and Jason is going to be sharing some of his insights from a recent JP Morgan conference that he's fresh back from. Also, I want to give a special thanks to the sponsors of today's episode, Fulfill, Northbeam, and Postscript. So thanks for joining us. Let's jump into it.
All right, let me talk to you about why I use Fulfill as my ERP. So the number one name in ERPs is NetSuite. To use NetSuite, it costs at least $100,000 a year. Like, honestly, a normal NetSuite contract is like $300,000 to $500,000 per year. Plus, you have to pay a third-party consultant, and it's always breaking or whatever, right? That's because NetSuite is owned by Oracle or Salesforce or whatever, and like it is the only way the company makes money, and it is a bloated piece of malware that has to support millions of people and millions of salaries and whatever, right? It's old technology from the 90s. Fulfill is modern, bootstrapped ERP built for today. So e-commerce first, Shopify first, that's the real. Before they were a sponsor, they've been my ERP for like 4 years at this point, and it's because they're the only modern option available at a reasonable price point, and they're thinking about the future, right? I mean, they haven't raised billions of dollars, right? I think they did one seed round one time, so they're a bootstrap SaaS company. The reason why that's important is I don't know if you've ever invested a lot of money into a SaaS tool just for them to go bankrupt, right? Or the news right now is that AMP just got bought by MailChimp, and you have to stop using AMP. And they just became the gold standard of email pop-up, and now you can't use them anymore. That's what happens with VC-backed companies. Fulfill is here for the long term. They're thinking with a long-term vision of this. And that's why I've used them for 4+ years, and I'm going to stick with them. Not only because it's a massive pain in the ass to change your ERP, so like I'm very incentivized to never leave, but it's because they're delivering good service at a good value with a long-term mentality. So what does that mean? They're shipping features that have the biggest impact, not features that, will help them land the next client that they need to be profitable. They're trying to make us happy so that we invest more and stay longer into this program. Investors aren't the customers. The customers are the customers. Kind of like Ridge, our customers are our customers. So that's why I love Fulfill. That's why I'm using Fulfill. They're investing in customer support, making sure the product is usable and staying at the top of the e-commerce industry. If you need an ERP and you cannot afford or will not pay for NetSuite, Fulfill is my option of choice. Thank you so much.
All right, we're back. Welcome to the Operators Podcast. I actually did some prep today, which is rare, so I'm hoping to add a little value. But before we go into my topic, which is mainly about the takeaways from the JP Morgan Founders Forum, how was everyone's weekend, guys?
We're recording this coming off of July 4th. So we give everybody the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th off. So it's a 5-day weekend. Do you guys do the same?
No.
Yeah, we had an extended one, but even more than that, like this time of year is when people take vacations. We have a lot of people that have young kids, and so it's really like I've learned that this is like the lowest momentum time of the year for me to make kind of decisions with my executive team, just because people are all over the place. So like, I think the first time that we'll have every executive back will be in August, maybe, just between different vacations and stuff.
Mike, that's perfect timing for you though, because aren't they tapping you to replace Biden?
Yes. Yeah. The Democratic Party is like, where should we go? What about a moderate to conservative person from Oklahoma? Wouldn't that be what the base is looking for?
It's a man of the people.
Listen, he's manufacturing in America now.
I do think I could do a better job in a debate format than Biden. I will say that pretty confidently.
Dude, my shoes could have done a better job than that.
Man,
that performance.
It's been, it's interesting because I'm at an age in my mid 40s where, my parents are in their mid 70s. My wife's parents are in their mid 70s. A lot of my friends. And so the Biden thing has actually been pretty sad. I mean, there's this whole political side of it, but there's also a side of it of like, there is a stage of life where you start to deal with the fact that, hey, you do get older and people who once were really smart and could think on their feet can't. And it's actually made me think a lot about things other than politics, ironically. There's a really good book that was recommended to me by another business leader called From Strength to Strength that I read last year, but it's basically about the transition that you have to make in starting in your kind of 40s of going from what he calls fluid intelligence to wisdom, because all the research says this. Basically, sometime in your 30s, usually your fluid intelligence just starts to decline, which is, it's crazy how early it starts. Now, obviously it speeds up as you get into your 70s and 80s, but that like, I don't have the quantitative reasoning power, raw horsepower that I had 5-10 years ago. I don't feel that, but that's what the research would say, is that I'm not even at the level that I was 10 years ago. And anyway, the entire book is about, there are two different types of people. There's people that are able to realize that, hey, as I get older, my abilities are going to diminish some, and I need to transition the way that I lead and realize what strengths I have and what I don't have anymore. And then there's people who just kind of rage against the dying of the light, and those people end up being very unhappy people, because you just work harder and harder and harder trying to do what you used to be able to do, and you can't really do anymore. And that's pretty much what the entire nation is seeing with Biden. Is it's just somebody who obviously has kind of lost touch with the reality of his situation, and he's surrounded by a bunch of people that are enabling that, or even obfuscating it. And like, I think it's really sad, and it's really sad. Obviously, it's embarrassing for our country, but it's sad that he's been surrounded by people that aren't willing to tell him the truth.
Well, what's really interesting, by the way, Ecom Grandpa over here, 53 years old, totally get it. Like, shit is slowing down. Brain.
How do you
down.
experience that, Jason? Have you ever like had a moment where you're like, wow, okay? Because I mean, you're brilliant. You've got this background in law and finance. Can you remember a specific situation of being like, oh wow, I've lost a step here?
Well, I like the connection to wisdom, right? Because I think what I do more, rather than dwelling on like, oh, my brain doesn't work as fast, or like, oh, why am I not remembering this word or this thing or this concept the way I want to? But I fall back on my life experience and how to manage people and my life. And this is one of the things that came up during the JP Morgan Founders Forum. There was a lot of talk about management and being a good manager. And it was Jack Ma and Jamie Dimon talking about management. And I would think the summary was, you got to let people do their job, let them make mistakes, let them fail. And like how that relates back to me getting old is for me to say, listen, I just can't micromanage as like I did. And like, look, I look at the group chats and I see how in the weeds so many of the people in our chats are. And like, I will selectively get in the weeds, but I specifically try not to. And like, when I see Katie chatting, like, I'm like, Katie is in every, like, she's pulling weeds all the damn day, I mean, it's unbelievable. Like, I just can't do it.
She must be a landscaper in her part-time, because that lady fucking is killing weeds. Going back to the Biden thing, Jason was telling me that he hit an 82 in golf, and I've never played golf in my entire life, so I had to look that up.
It was an 88. Sorry, it was an 88.
Okay, 88. Still great. Biden debate said he shot a 78. I'm like, dude, there's no fucking way this guy's better than Jason at golf. Like, he can't move. I don't know. I don't know what to say, man. So,
well, and that was the thing. Like, the Democrats trying to frame it like, well, Trump lies all the time, but Biden tells the truth. It's like, neither of them are telling the truth most of the time, right? Like, it's like they're just lying in different ways. This idea that that one of them is this paragon of virtue and truth is just like, that's not true.
Well, dude,
You
also,
know,
I mean, I'm glad you're breaking that apart because my entire life, all politicians lie all the time. I don't know. Like, I'm like, now all of a sudden, like, that's what they're getting dinged for. It's like, dude, you get into politics to steal money from people. I don't know what to say.
it's your job is to lie.
But talking about like this is like the big lie, right? And here's what
Yeah.
I'm curious about. There's been a lot of memes about Biden, for months, for years, about him just not being able to manage his life. And the media was so big on not admitting it and covering it up. And so and of course the people on the left, the far left, will be like, hey, we got to do what we got to do to stay in power. But the question I have is, does the common person, the centrist, which is most of the people out there, do they feel like they were actually lied to, or are they like, oh, it's oh that now the lie has been exposed?
I think they feel lied to, Jason. Like I've actually been consuming a lot of this. I was on vacation, and so like I've been consuming a lot of the Twitter sphere podcasts, and yes, absolutely, from the kind of center left to left, they they basically were fed this message that like, hey, all these videos of Biden looking like he doesn't know where he is. These are all just edits, and they're cheap fakes, or I don't know what. Maybe they had some name for it.
Deep fakes.
And
Yeah.
yeah, like they basically were fed that he's sharp as a tack. He's really with it. He's running circles around his aides. And I think this was with the political right in the United States, there's been this gradual loss of confidence in institutions, in the mainstream media, in universities. But for the political left, those have still been really held up. You still wanted your kid to go to Harvard. You still trust what MSNBC says. And I think they're having their own reckoning where it's like, oh, no, I can't necessarily trust these people. And it's just a continuation of a trend that maybe the internet set this off. I don't know, of just a lack of loss of trust in our institutions.
So that's what's going to
and in
make
these
this
kind of
election.
monolithic
That's what's
structures.
going to make this election. If that's the case, that's what's going to make this election interesting. Because if there really is this huge swath of people in the middle who are like, "Wow, they really did lie to us," it could get interesting. I mean, I think smart people who are on Twitter and people who are just doing their own investigation, they've always been like, they understood what's going on with Biden, but they excuse it. They excuse it because they're like, well, we want our party, we want our guys, or oh, well, he's not doing the work anyway. There's people there. But if you're right, and I do think you're right, I think that could be a really interesting effect. But you said something earlier, Mike, and we cut you off about something about tweets. What was it?
Oh, well, yeah, it was a total throwaway comment, but it was just interesting that Elon made likes private on Twitter, which I think is absolutely the right move. Like we had seen examples in 2020 and 2021 of people getting canceled for just liking tweets, right? Like, which is just an insane place that our society has gotten to. And I think what we've seen is that the internet makes things more transparent, and that there's some good that comes with that, and there's some bad that comes with that. Well, like we just talked about, one of the bad things that comes with that is you lose trust in institutions and people when you kind of see, all the information about them. But that some level of privacy is actually important for people to be able to function. And we're living right now in a time where the stories that are coming out about Biden were that if you were around him, you knew. Basically, it was like an emperor's new clothes, where everybody kind of knew, hey, he's not really up to it. He's not really all there. But nobody can say that publicly because of the backlash or whatever. And that having mechanisms where you can express your thoughts, where there is some level of kind of anonymity or privacy, is actually important. But the thing that was interesting actually to me, when Elon announced that they'd made it private, one thing he said was that the number of likes had shot up. almost immediately. When people realized, hey, nobody's looking at whether or not I like this post, then I'm much more willing to like it, which is definitely true with me. But the other thing that he did is he posted a screenshot and it actually had all of their numbers. It had it was one of their internal dashboards. And so it was really interesting to me as a data nerd. It was the first time that I'd actually seen the data behind Twitter. You could see how many likes they were getting every 5 minutes worldwide across the platform. And it gave me some idea of the scale that was going on. But one kind of way to shift the conversation to get back to this Biden thing that I think is super interesting and why this election is super interesting. One of the things that came out over the last few days, somebody posted this on Twitter, but it seemed very relevant, is a series of emails that Zuckerberg wrote to Peter Thiel. Basically, Peter Thiel apparently really pushed Zuckerberg to be thinking about Facebook's positioning in regards to generations and specifically in regards to millennials. And Zuckerberg wrote him back, I thought, some really interesting insights. But more or less, their thread of conversation was that the boomers have co-opted all of the kind of structures in the United States to serve them, right? So why are we not building more homes? Because the boomers don't want more homes. Why are entitlements like the third rail of politics? Because they're really important to boomers. And that basically, because the boomers have been this huge voting bloc, that everything in the United States is basically set up to work well for the boomers. And I don't think this is a controversial take anymore. I think pretty much everybody thinks this. There was an article that came out, Wall Street Journal, where it's like, we're still here, we're not dead yet, where it talked about boomers living their best life. And people were kind of deriding this over the weekend. But the thing that made the Zuckerberg emails so interesting is that he went on to say that their theory is that as the boomers start to decline, that the millennials are going to start to take over these institutions, and these institutions are going to start to reflect the preference of millennials and do what millennials want them to do. And if that's true, then this is like the last of the boomer elections. Like, this is the dying death rattle of the boomers, this election, where you've got two, ancient dudes that neither of whom should be running at this age, probably, for president. And that starting 4 years from now, the millennials are going to be in charge and we're going to be in a new paradigm. And a lot of things are going to work really differently because they're going to be optimizing for what a group in the millennials who want very different things than the boomers.
Okay, so I got to make 2 points. First, the reason we're talking about Twitter is it's really popular in Japan. So Jason's launched in Japan, and we're running Twitter ads in Japan, and it's really working because it's I think their most active market. So I know we think about it in the US, there's like 140 million users in the US. There's equally as many in Japan. So
Wow.
yeah, it's really popular there. So you can run it there. And the second thing is, I think Jason asked about what do centrists think about what's happening, and oh yeah, there's a large swath that could decide the election. So it's not how elections work for the president, right? There's 10,000 people in Wisconsin, there's 50,000 people in Pennsylvania, and there's 15,000 people in Michigan. Those are the only people that matter. So
Yeah.
there's less than 100,000 people. I wonder what they think. I don't know. That's it doesn't.
One of the best comments I heard somebody say, Sean, is they were making the exact point that really this election, there's how few swing voters really are there, and there's very few, and especially in the swing states, there's a small group of people that basically decide this thing. And they were making the point that so many people, whether Biden has dementia or can remember his own name, they'd still vote for him over Trump. They were like, heck, even if you believe Hunter Biden is functionally the acting president, they'd still vote for him over Donald Trump, which I thought was hilarious. But it's actually probably true that, there's a group of people that are literally, you could put any other human being in the world and I would vote for him over Donald Trump.
Well, Trump derangement syndrome is real. I mean,
it's strong.
It is so real.
Is it that, Jason, or is it just that?
No, it is so real,
dude.
I was in, so I was celebrating a friend's birthday a couple of weeks ago. We're at a pub in Burbank. Burbank is great, by the way, Sean, because it's got its own police force. There's no homeless. It's clean. It felt like,
yeah, every fucking Disney movie featuring a city is based on Burbank. There's a reason why there's Walt Disney Studios there. It is small town LA. It's pretty sick.
It's crazy. I mean, it was I thought I was in a different country. But So it was the night of the debate, and I wasn't going to watch the debate. I'll get the tweets, right? And I'm just here for the memes. And so, but we're sitting in this pub, and this one of the guy's old buddies, comes in, and he happened to be a Canadian. By the way, Canadians can't stand Trump. It's crazy. But this guy, like the minute anyone said anything about debate, you should have seen the reaction on his face, like talking about Trump being a liar, wanting to be a dictator. Like it was the passion and the fervor and like the scrambled eggs of his brain, like being so emotional. It was crazy. And I mean, I see it all the time. It scrambled people's brain.
Well, we clearly need to move on to the next phase, whatever it is. It's just too bad we're going to have to wait 4 more years to get to it. Like, we've got to get younger, more competent people. I mean, on the All In pod, they were talking about what if a Jamie Dimon or a Jeff Bezos ran, and more or less they came to the conclusion of there's no way the Democratic Party would allow that because they're billionaires and because it's a very insular organization. But it's like, gosh, how much better would the world be and would the United States be if we just got a competent, moderate executive in there?
Right.
Somebody who could just govern with logic and reason and efficiency and effectiveness. But that's not the world that we're living in right now. And my only hope is that when the baby boomers kind of lose their death grip on politics, that there's something better on the other side.
We have RFK, dude. I mean, he could win. He wins in a landslide versus
everybody. I know that he didn't eat a dog, I can vote for him. Did you guys see that?
Mike's bar for voting.
This is where we're at. Trump is trying to not be, he's trying to not be a convicted felon. Biden's trying to remember his name, and RFK is trying to explain that that wasn't actually a dog that he ate in that photo. This is the slate of people we have.
This is America.
Bro, I love the chaotic energy RFK brings. Like,
it's amazing.
Dude's like,
isn't he jacked too? Isn't he jacked?
Yes, that dude's jacked.
He can do 50 push-ups. Like, that should be the fucking presidential test. Like, I mean, you guys are probably too young, but when I was in elementary school, there was a presidential fitness exam.
Yes, the Presidential Fitness Award. Did you ever get the presidential, Sean?
Yeah, well, to graduate elementary school, you had to do it. And it was like a mile in under 12 minutes. And you had to climb a rope and all this type of shit. Dude, the president should have to do it. Like, that should be the fucking, like, it's named after him. The only guy who could fucking do it is RFK. So he's getting my vote.
You're like breaching all kinds of inclusivity protocols there, Sean. I just want you to know.
Yeah.
But
FDR probably, unfortunately, FDR couldn't be president with the whole wheelchair.
But I want to know why, Mike, are you flexing the Masters shirt again? I mean, didn't you flex this on us once already?
Listen, like I've said, Jason, when people ask me if I play golf, I say not well. I've probably played golf 14 times in my adult life, and like 12 of those have been at just unbelievable courses. And so what that means is I just embarrass myself in the best venues in the world.
You look pretty athletic to me. You probably can hit it real far.
Here's the key. Like 1 out of every 6 shots, you're like, man, that guy's amazing.
Pasted.
And then the other 5, you're like, that guy, I'm not sure that guy can chew gum and walk at the same time. He looks so, that shot looked so bad.
It's consistent with you being an entrepreneur, Mike. This is what that is.
That's
right. 1 out of every 6 I hit. And when it does, it's amazing. But those other 5.
Well, it's actually interesting. One of the things I tell people about golf is that, to be an entrepreneur, you got to be so competitive. Like, would you guys describe yourself as competitive? I know you're competitive, Sean. Would you, Matt, Jason, would you describe yourself as competitive?
Yeah.
You have to be competitive. Like, I don't know how you do entrepreneurship if you're not a competitive person. And competitive people want to be the best at everything. Like right? Like, there's not like you are really good about partitioning out that competitiveness to only certain areas of your life. And so I get out there. The last time I went and played golf, I get out there. I'm the only person who didn't bring their clubs on this trip. That tells you anything, right? Like that right off the bat, you're like, I am screwed. So I'm on this, we're 2 days of golfing, beautiful courses. And I'm renting clubs, and I'm just, I'm getting my butt kicked. And my immediate thought is, okay, I'm going to take a week off from work. I'm going to hire somebody. I'm going to get awesome. And then I'm going to come back next year and I'm going to smoke these fools. And And then I'm like, no, I should not do that thing at all. Like, there's an opportunity cost for my time. And there are so many things in my life that are better to be good at than golf. And so, like, this is one of the ways that the competitive side of your personality can backfire against you. Like, it can make you want to try and win in a bunch of games that you shouldn't even be trying to win, right? Like, I want to win in the drinkware game. I want to win. I need to win in that game, and I want to win in some other games I'm playing. But what I have to do to be really good at the games that I want to win is I have to be willing to not win in a bunch of other games. So golf is one of those other games.
Mike, when do you think, at what age do you think people start to value wisdom? Because it's not like when you're 20. Like, I know I didn't.
Yeah.
But like, what? So like, I get the transition from a certain kind of brain function to a, then Jason, what you're describing is like wisdom, right? It's like, I just got lots of lived experience. When do we value it though?
Well, I'll make a more general observation that I think successful people start to value it really early on, even when they don't have it, and they start to be able to identify who does have it. Right? Like, so much, we live in a world that's just awash with information, right? Like, there's more information, there's more people that you can listen to than ever before. And now with AI and deep fakes and stuff, like, there's just so much stuff out there. So part of wisdom, if you're in your teens or 20s or 30s, even listening to this, is just being smart about who and what you consume, right? Like, who are the people worth listening to? Who are the people worth imitating? And so I think for me, like, I came to value wisdom really early on. And what that allowed me to do was to say, hey, who's worth listening to and who's worth trying to be like and who's not. And, definitely when you get online, we talk about this like on Twitter and stuff. There's so many people trying to sell courses, so many people that are just kind of full of it. And once you start to really value wisdom, you really develop a radar for that stuff. But then hopefully what happens, I guess I would say this, wisdom, part of the definition of wisdom is that you don't have to make your own mistakes to learn things.
Dude, yeah.
And so, yeah, go ahead, Sean.
I was going to say, I'm going to drop some wisdom. I've just stopped talking about shit that I don't know. And like all these people want to have opinions about places. Dude, I will not talk about a place I haven't been, because people were talking mad shit about China. And then I went to China and I'm like, oh, actually, it's totally chill. So.
All right. I want to talk about PostScript for a minute. We switched to PostScript a few months ago, and the transition was completely seamless. And I have to say, like, the level of commitment they have to their clients is exceptional. They chased us for a really long time. So we're using their SMS platform, and it's gone off without a hiccup. Like I said, they're really committed to us. The pricing was very reasonable, and they are working on some really cool stuff with AI. And I think we should expect an announcement from that pretty soon. So check out PostScript if you're new in SMS. So that's a good segue. Should we dig in a little bit here?
Let's do it, Jason.
Jason,
I want to hear your
Teach
knowledge,
us, man.
your wisdom.
All right. I mean,
yeah, let's sit at the knee of the e-commerce grandpa. Grandpa, tell us a story about the trip you just went.
So I don't do a lot of conferences these days. It's just not that exciting. But for like 6 months, the guys at JP Morgan were like touting this founders forum. And, you get a personal invitation from Jamie Dimon, and then I send it to my banker, and they're like, oh, Jamie's going to be there. This is a great event. You should really go. And it's in New York City. And it's, what's nice about it is it's like, there's like an event the evening before, like networking, whatever, with one speaker at Lincoln Center. And the next day it's at JP Morgan's global headquarters. And it's about 2/3 of the day. They had like 6 or 7 really good speakers. The 3 that I saw were Jack Ma, Tyler Perry, and Jamie. And I actually was another meeting during Tyler Perry, but it was really interesting. Like the takeaways, I feel like I took away some really important large scale concepts and opinions, and the main topics were about management, China. And then subtopics were about AI and cyber. And I think the China one is really, really interesting because, and Sean statement is true, right? It's like you don't know what's going on there unless you go there. I've never been to China, but one thing I always say is like you cannot necessarily condemn an entire nation of people because of their government. But that's like a broader strokes thing. That's not really what was talked about, but I think that's really what Sean is sort of saying. But Jack Ma was incredible. He spent a lot of time talking about management and letting people make mistakes. And his one really key takeaway was, and I think this is for our audience, is a real business finances its operations through internal cash flow. Not a startup. Startups are startups, right? Young businesses are young businesses, but real businesses, they finance their business through internal cash flow. And I think that is, Jack Ma, founder of Alibaba. I think he owns the Brooklyn Nets now. He's like everywhere. But I thought that was really, really insightful.
Let's pause on that, Jason, because I think it's a great point. If as a thought exercise, name a company that was grown through financing, VC, selling equity, whatever, and primarily financed the growth of their business through that, and then successfully transitioned to generating free cash flow and living off that free cash flow.
Facebook?
There are a lot of large tech companies that did it, but there are so many that didn't. And I think tech is the example of where you can raise a bunch of money and get to scale. But there's a vision for it, and there's a little bit of the venture world is there to take risk, and they just know that some of these are going to fail. So it's out there, but they all had a plan, from Amazon to Google to Facebook to actually make money one day. It's out there longer in tech, whereas in retail and D2C, it's like you shouldn't have to build that level of scale through outside financing to build a sustainable business.
And it's not tech, it's network effect businesses, right? Like, yes, they all have tech components, but what doesn't in fucking 2024? It is Uber, Airbnb, Amazon, Facebook, any of these businesses. And it's because there is more than one value per net user added, right? And with physical products, they max out at one net value per user added. Like, when you add somebody to the system, it doesn't make the system more valuable than the person you added. And like with network effects, it does, right? And like that's a concept you have to unlock, is that selling a physical product, if it's water bottles, wallets, pans, or phone cases, you only ever get the money you get from selling that person that thing. And maybe there's word of mouth, maybe there's these other things. But when you add a user on Facebook, they will add friends. When you add a user on Uber, they will take more rides. It's the network effect problem. So if you sell physical, go ahead.
Software too, right? Like enterprise software companies, like Salesforce has no network effects. Now there's NetSuite. I mean, there's a lot of enterprise SaaS that is venture backed, got to scale, and then they generate
and probably the common thread there is that their variable cost is extremely low.
And a lot of their cost of scale is front loaded too, Mike. The thing with consumers, right, your cost of scale is not front loaded. Right. Like your cost of growth is not in the first 5 years, because like how much R&D am I doing on, like, you're just not, like, you're not doing any of that type of work in consumer and retail, nor are you in landscaping or HVAC services.
The product in enterprise SaaS is a network product, because when you sell in Oracle or fucking NetSuite or whatever, it has to be embraced and used internally. So that becomes a network effect. So yes, each individual sale is its own spoke or whatever, but like you land it and then it becomes a network inside the business. So that's why I think it is a bunch of mini network effects. But
so one point that I would make though is that even though we can think of software examples that have done it, the reality, and somebody said this, is the vast majority don't. The vast majority never find a way to get off the juice.
Yep.
And I think this is the principle that we should take away for running a business. Don't expect for anything about how you run your business in the first year to 4 years to suddenly be able to shift gears in year 8 or year 9. It's very unlikely that you'll be able to do it. There are examples, but the reality is if you are running a cash flow negative business, and you're financing it from outside sources, it's really difficult to all of a sudden create a culture where you're going to finance it internally. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult to do. And for most of the people listening to this, you're not running a cash flow negative business. But the question would be, what is the myth that you're believing about the future, the transition that you're believing about the future that you're going to be able to make that you probably won't actually be able to make? Like, you establish the norms and the operating system for your business, your culture early on. And then that really drives the way that the business functions down the road. And the lie people believe is that I can flip it, I can change it. And organizations usually don't work that way.
Yeah. We've sold, in the last 12 months, like over 1 million wallets. Very little of that helps me sell the millionth and one wallet. Like the next wallet, like there's very little benefit I get from selling the million. Of course, you have social proof and word of mouth, whatever, but like it's way easier if you have 1 million people on Uber to get that next person because the infrastructure is built out. But Jason, what's point number 2?
So I'm just going to bounce around a little bit real quick because there's a few things I want to make sure we get out there. So, there was all that talk about, management giving young people rope. There was, because it's a big finance group, there was a lot of talk about M&A. I think everybody cares about M&A. And what they were saying is like the private equity market, it's just a disaster for M&A right now. Like they're not doing deals. It doesn't matter how much money there is. Like sponsors are incredibly risk averse and there's not a lot going on unless it's like some kind of minority deal with a lot of structure, a lot of protection for the investors. They did say that M&A among strategics is starting to pick up a little bit. So if you are one of those businesses where you solve a problem for a strategic, that's what I used to talk about when I was a banker. Like, how does this business solve a problem for the buyer? Those are the best deals because if you are a seller and you think some buyer is going to solve your problems, buyer doesn't care about your problems. Buyer wants to solve its problems, and that's why they'll do that deal. So anyway, strategics are there for interesting opportunities there where the target will solve a problem for them. Massive. Obviously, everyone talking about AI. All the investment is in AI. Like only thing people want to invest in, the only thing people want to think about is AI. So that's like the sort of general theme stuff. I want to move on a little bit to China because I thought it was really interesting what I learned. And maybe people know this already, and maybe I just finally woke up. But you guys okay if I move on to China?
Yeah.
You want to hit on any of that stuff? Okay. So China, there's like two components to this. There's the Chinese economy in general, and then there's all the geopolitical risk around China. So, and Jack Ma and both Jack Ma and Jamie Dimon were in a really good position to talk about both of those things. Jack Ma talked more about China from an economic perspective, and Jamie Dimon had some very insightful comments regarding the geopolitical situation with China. But it's important to me because we do manufacture a lot of products in China, not only in China, but we definitely have big China exposure. And we're in fact getting ready to start selling Hexclad in China as well, because it's a huge market. I think there's like 300 million consumers out there in China that can afford Hexclad. It's like the same size as the US market to us, if we can penetrate it. But the Chinese consumer is definitely feeling pain right now. They're being much more judicious in their spend. Instead of buying 3 things for $100 each, they're buying 10 things for $30 each. So that's what we're hearing there. And so I think for us, it doesn't matter because we're a premium product and we're going to kind of appeal to a certain audience. But I will report back on how things go with China. Just signed like the documents to open up our China entity and all these things. So obviously we have a great partner in China because our manufacturer is there in China. But yeah, we are going to roll out China, even though it's seeming like it might not be the best time to go after China from a consumer perspective. So I know Sean spent some time in China recently. Did you have any thoughts on like the Chinese consumer when you were there?
Well, we're also trying to sell in China, and I own an entity in China. We have a factory there. that Rich owns. And then I just hopefully we can pull up the graphic, but over the weekend I had a lot of free time because my dog had surgery, and then fucking it just like he's just laying around. I have to be in the room with him all the time. It's like a whole thing. So I had a lot of free time. And so the World Bank has data going back to 1960, and you can just pull up like GDP numbers and like a bunch of really interesting data. And if you look at it, I don't get how China doesn't fall into the same traps that Japan did, right? So Japan in 1994 made up like 17 or 18% of global GDP. In 1960, they were 4%, and today they're 4%. So it was a 30-year rise and a 30-year fall from 4% of global GDP to 18 and then 4 again. And China has a 20-year rise. In 2001, they were 4%. Today, I mean, in 2021, they peaked at like 18. They're at 16 and a half right now. They're already on the downward slide. And I just don't see how by 2045, they're not at 4% of global GDP again. And it's not to say that like China is going to fall into rubble and despair. I think there's a lot of fucking anti-China sentiment in the United States and just globally. But Japan didn't fall into rubble or despair. Japan's an awesome country that you can visit, and everyone's rich and happy and having a great fucking time. Of course, they have their own problems, but I think we're past peak China. I think China's going to have all the same problems Japan suffered from, and it's not to say that like we should discount the market or whatever. But I think as India starts to emerge, as parts of Africa and Latin America starts to emerge, as the U.S. continues to just be dominant. Like if you pull up that chart, U.S. share of GDP was at a high of 35, a low of 15, but the average is 25 or 26, and we're right there still. So I think that's just kind of the steady state of the world. And China's had an awesome rise. Japan had an awesome rise. Korea had an awesome rise. Like it's time for probably the next order.
Sean, the GDP thing, I haven't seen it. It's a relative percentage, right? So it's not their absolute GDP that's gone down. It's their relative position to other countries,
Correct.
other nations. Right.
Yeah.
And that's the key point that I think gets lost in a lot of this stuff is Japan. People criticize Japan because it's like they've had this downfall. It's like downfall of what? It's straight up just the competitive nature of the comment. It's like, well, relatively sure, but like you said, everything there is fine. So I think that Jason, to your point, it's probably a great time to go into China. Like the best time to do anything is when like things aren't awesome, right? Because other people aren't doing it too.
Yeah, there was definitely consumer pain and recession from 94 to 2002, but like in Japan.
Sure.
But I mean, dude, now it's an amazing market, and dude, it's so fun to go there. I think China's going to be the same thing. And I would love to hear your guys' thoughts, but then we could talk about the political risk. And the one thing I'll say is, do you think the US political system has anything fucking put together? No, we all admit that it's total dog shit. Dude, why do you think the Chinese Communist Party is any more put together? It's like there's infighting, there's competing priorities. There's this like they crack down on tech because they have a real estate sector that fucking needs brick and mortar businesses. It's all the same problems the US has, but like probably even harder because they can't blame anybody else. But we'd love to hear your guys' thoughts.
All right. I want to talk about PostScript for a minute. We switched to PostScript a few months ago, and the transition was completely seamless. And I have to say, like, the level of commitment they have to their clients is exceptional. They chased us for a really long time. So we're using their SMS platform, and it's gone off without a hiccup. Like I said, they're really committed to us. The pricing was very reasonable, and they are working on some really cool stuff with AI, and I think we should expect an announcement from that pretty soon. So check out PostScript if you're new in SMS. Well, Jamie Dimon made one statement that was really interesting about the geopolitical side. What I loved about him is that he was very real and practical, like grounded in reality, talking about real issues, like talking about how our government is a total mess, talking about how like the craziness around climate change is actually really negative for the country long term. Like the way we're dealing with climate change, like that people are way off base on it, which is very interesting for him to see that. He was saying that inflation is not necessarily out of, like, the risk of inflation is still there right now. And so, they're talking about maybe cutting rates soon. He's like, there's still a ton of risk in the economy, but on the geopolitical side, the statement that he made, which I really took to heart, was that if your business is solely reliant on China for manufacturing and you're there to save a few percentage points on margin, that you are making a big mistake. That you need
Yeah,
to be
I
careful.
think that's the big story for people listening to this is just, how does all the geopolitical stuff matter to me? How does China's economy or their, demographics and the ages of their demographics? Most of us are not selling any kind of material amount in China. It's really more on the manufacturing side. And I think that I know quite a bit about this because we have been for the last 3 years investigating. We created domestic manufacturing, and what I've basically learned is, what warts do you want on your frog? Basically, because if you go to China, you've got the risk of, or maybe the certainty of rising tariffs and geopolitical tensions. If you go to India, you've got your own, that's a less developed ecosystem, and India has gotten quite protectionary, and so you're probably not getting as good a cost. They're still getting their tools from China, and they're usually further behind. If you go to countries like Vietnam, a lot of times, a lot of these countries, the issue is they just don't have the ecosystem that China has. They don't have, like a good example is when people started trying to move stuff to Vietnam when Trump enacted his first set of tariffs. Vietnam didn't even have any deep water ports. It's like you would never think about that, but you have to have deep water ports. Like these are big freaking ships that these containers go on, and if you don't have deep water ports, how do you load up the containers? And so there's just all this infrastructure that doesn't exist. We've been looking at Mexico, but hey, Mexico is terrifying in its own right. Like look at the homicide rates in some of the regions of Mexico. So if you go to the US, you're going to be paying more, and you're going to have to deal with the fact that the network of experts that can do things like tools is not only is it more expensive, but it's a much smaller network. And most of these people are in their 50s or 60s. It's really not clear what comes in 10 or 15 years. So I think it's the right point to make, Jason, that for most people, the strategy that they're taking with China is just cross your fingers and hope you can continue to get cheap products from there for the next 20 years. But if you're not at least coming up with contingency plans, then, your strategy is hope, and usually hope is not a great strategy.
Yeah. I just want to say we make stuff in China, Vietnam, and America, and you're fucking spot on, right? Like China isn't even that cheap. Like their people are super expensive. The whole benefit of China is that everybody's there doing stuff already, right? And Vietnam, like there's luggage manufacturers there. We make our luggage there. The biggest problem is it's so slow because I had talked to my manufacturer about this, but like there's a massive river systems, but like then there's all these bridges that were made like in like the 1800s or whatever, and like they'd have to demolish the bridges to get bigger boats to go through, and it's billions of dollars. They haven't done it yet, so the boats are just like these tiny little barges, all the way fucking stacked up. And then the problem in America is, there's totally less infrastructure in terms of like manufacturing knowledge or other commands or anything like that. But also, you're just dealing with US dollars for everything. And the labor is basically the same. Like, we pay people 20, 25 bucks, whatever. China's maybe 10, 15. But the problem is the fucking commercial real estate is so goddamn expensive. Like, that is the real thing stopping me from I bought a fucking strip mall and it was millions of dollars, right? Where in China, if you want to buy a building, it's like less than $1 million. So that's the real fucking problem for me in America, at least. But what about you guys?
Come to Oklahoma, baby. Come to Oklahoma. As a funny story on that, at one point we talked to our primary Chinese manufacturer about doing a joint venture, and they're throwing out countries that are kind of in the Eastern Hemisphere and more in China's sphere of influence. And then they threw out Mexico, and we're like, hey, why not the United States? Why don't we do a joint venture in the US? Which, in retrospect, I realize now there's a lot of reasons why they wouldn't do that. But the first objection they had, they were like, well, we could never afford land prices in the US. And I'm like, I don't know if you guys, I said, what do you think it costs for land? And they threw out a guess. And I was like, you guys haven't been to Oklahoma because it's a heck of a lot. Here's a crazy number. Our current manufacturing facility, what do you guys think we're paying per square foot?
Oh, I don't want to know.
We're leasing it. I think it's $3.50.
Oh, that's not terrible. Okay.
Square foot.
Yeah. Yeah. We can get comparable, not in our big cities, but like in all your secondary cities here, that's about.
But it's like, if you can do $3.50 or something like that, like to lease out a place, then like that's doable. Like that's not that far. So like you said, Matt, like now if you're in LA or gosh, certain parts of California, like I'm sure it's insane, Sean, but like there's still options in the United States where the cost piece doesn't break you. At least I think.
I can tell you like so we make peel-a-case products domestically here in our city, in Canada. When we first moved manufacturing here, we didn't really know what the cost per piece would work out to relative to our China operation. And right now we're sitting almost parity. Like cost to produce a case in Canada, in Kelowna, not a cheap city, but not LA, is cost competitive with China. Now the issue is, it's the thing with China that Sean, I think you hit on, is they are kind of the co-man for every non-CPG category. Like you can get a lot of CPG products co-manufactured in the US. Like some of the biggest CPG companies in the world, they manufacture domestic in every country they're in.
They have to.
You're not getting, you have to.
Well, yeah, because it doesn't make any sense to put that stuff on a ship.
No.
Like I'm not putting Cheerios on an ocean freighter, right? Like that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Right.
Also,
so like
the
this is the
FDA, it's very hard to import food. they make it very difficult, but go ahead.
Yeah. So it's doable to make low cost things domestically. It's just that we in the 80s and 90s, like when the outsourcing to China started to really gain steam, we just outsourced all the plumbing. Right. So like even with peel-a-case, I still have to get my tools made in China, even though I get them shipped here so that I can manufacture the product domestically. I got to get the steel cut there, because getting people to cut steel here in anywhere in North America is really freaking hard.
Yeah, so I wrote a tweet that went really viral about this subject and talking about the manufacturing ecosystem. But Tim Cook is talking about this exact same thing. He says people assume that Apple is in China because of cost, and it's not. To make iPhones requires really specialized tools where, millimeters and half millimeters really matter. And he's like, if you wanted to look at the tooling community and you got everybody from, North America that's a tooling expert, you could fit them all in a pretty small room. He's like, if you went to China and got all of their experts, you could fill football fields worth of people. That there's such a disparity in terms of the number of tooling experts in China right now. And to me, that's the most interesting thing about China. And if trade breaks down with China, is like you said, Matt, the inputs like that you have to make things, the entire world depends on Chinese tooling. And so even you don't necessarily have to have the things from their factories. Like you can create that factory anywhere, but the factory has to have tools, and those tools, especially the ones that are cost effective, are almost, I bet like 95% of those are coming from China, if not more.
It's totally right. But but how do we deal with it? Because the point is this, and this is what Jamie Dimon is saying. This is all true. We all know this stuff, right? Like, but we need to deal with it. You as a business, as a steward of a business, as a fiduciary to your company, you at least need to have a strategy for the geopolitical risk, because I think we all know that major geopolitical issues, it's like the butterfly wings. Like anything can happen. We really don't know. We like, don't accuse people of being rational, because they're not, and not even politicians. So like, if you look at how World War I started, there's a great book by Barbara Tuchman called The Guns of August, and it's like totally random, like how World War I started.
It totally is.
Totally random.
It's a crazy, like, the way that it's interesting. The guy that gets assassinated, Francis Ferdinand, he had a route, And basically, I don't remember the whole detail, but more or less, they changed the route, and the original plan to kill him basically is thwarted. But then, through a series of very unfortunate and unlikely events, he kind of gets stuck in a different alley, and they're able to assassinate him. And that this sets off, like you said, Jason, sets off this event that, in a lot of ways, you could say World War II is just kind of connected to World War One when they signed the World War One armistice. Somebody said, this isn't a peace treaty, this is a 20-year ceasefire or something like that. And that's what it ended up being. So it is always impossible to anticipate the second, third order effects, especially in geopolitical stuff. I just don't know what the solutions are. As a person that's been out there and been investing capital, China has had the foresight to really invest in their ecosystem in a way that other people have not. And I mentioned this earlier, but I'll come back to it. The problem in the United States is partially that we have not passed down trades. Like, if you talk to the tooling experts in the United States, they're end of career, or at the very least, late to mid career.
Yep.
And who are the people that are even going to make these tools in the United States in,
And fix
20
H-1B
years?
visas.
And fix them. Yeah, I think it's a visa. I think part of it's visa for sure, but it's like make the tools and then maintain the tools. That's the other thing that we run into.
It's a great point. Like, and this goes back to politics. Like, listen, we've got to figure out a better strategy with immigration. Right now, our strategy with immigration is, if you're motivated and mobile and you don't mind, ducking some barbed wire, welcome to America. If you actually go through the formal channels, good luck. You've got a 10% chance. We had somebody on our team, really talented person, who had graduated from the University of Oklahoma. She was trying to get a permanent visa, could not get it. And had to go back to school to get an extension of her visa, and can't work here anymore. We've lost a team member over this. And I know that people in the tech community are feeling this. We've got to come up with something better. Like, our immigration strategy, it's so simple. Our immigration strategy should be that we try and get all of the smartest people in the world to come here. And then we don't have a lot of appetite for people who aren't going to be additive to our society, right? Like, this is so simple, but it's not our strategy right now. And we're going to have to come up with some kind of a strategy, or we're going to find ourselves in 20 years where we can't make anything. And we're even more captive to, whether it's Chinese tooling or anything else.
I think, Jason, what you're asking too. So, like, speaking from experience, building domestic manufacturing capacity, right? Part of the problem is geopolitical risk is not pain that any business owner is feeling right now. So we're trying to ask people to, like, solve a problem that we don't currently have. Like, nobody here feels geopolitical risk. People like Jamie Dimon and Jack Ma, they're in a position where they think about this shit and they run these, like, insane global multinational corporations, right? But, like, the average business owner listening to this thing does not feel geopolitical risk. We built our manufacturing facility in Canada to solve a balance sheet problem, to solve a cash conversion.
You had an actual
problem.
impetus to do the thing right
reasons.
now.
Yeah. So, like, the pain of building out this capability here to us was worth it, because I was looking at real, like, today problems. And I'm like, if we solve these, we have, like, a genuine competitive edge in our market.
Okay. So, question for the group. When in your business's life cycle does it make sense to do things that are more insurance or mitigation moves? So what you're saying, Matt, which I think is a great point, is that, hey, if you have a real financial motivation right now to do domestic manufacturing, to diversify your supply chain, whatever, then you're going to do it. And if you don't, you're not going to do it. Especially the smaller the company you are, the more it's like, maybe it's not even, apathy. It's you just can't. You can't invest resources in something that you might not necessarily use. That's what insurance is. Insurance is basically, I put some resources aside for something that might not happen, or might happen, to protect myself. And early on in a company, you don't even have the ability to do that. It's just like, well, we're going to cross our fingers and hope, right? And because I don't have the resources to have a solution. At what point do you start to invest more resources in mitigating contingencies, mitigating, those long tail events?
Well, that's what Jamie Dimon's saying. He's like, you need to take the hit. You just
Well,
you
and
need
for
to make the
Hexclad,
investment.
obviously, like you guys are on your way to being a public company. Like it makes sense. Like people are going to evaluate the company. My question is, at what point does it start to make sense? Obviously, like, when we first started Simple Modern, like you're trying to get product market fit, it's like we're not thinking about any of this. So what do you guys think? Where in the spectrum do you really start to say, okay, we're going to intentionally now invest these resources, not necessarily in growth, but in protecting the nest egg of what we've built?
Yeah, well, okay. I'm gonna use Jason as an example. Okay. We spent a little over $2 million to have a facility in Arizona that can make 1 million wallets a year. That's like roughly like what we have right now. And then there's more money. And like really what the problem with American manufacturing is, like we had to like fucking like do like make the building nice inside, and that was like 300 grand, where you can buy a building in China for fucking 500 grand. So the whole building over there is like what it costs to make my building nice inside. That's just contractor costs. But going back to Jason, if Jason spent $10 million, he could have a factory anywhere in America producing probably 70% of his units. So it's like, when do you want to take the $10 million hit, right? And I think you could go out there and get quotes to make it fully robotic, and it would be $50 million. But like just like a machine shop in Ohio, $10 million, you could make millions and millions of pieces of cookware. And when would it make sense for him to do that? Well, he has to have $10 million, and there has to be probably another reason, and it would be going public, right? So Jason, you probably aren't going to do that this year. You probably won't do it next year. But I think by 2026, you should have a plan that's like at least talk to like the auto parts manufacturers in Wisconsin and be like, what does a JV look like? And you can get that scoped out, and it would be probably 10 million or less. So for everybody else, I mean, just fucking hold on for as long as you can, because it's super hard and expensive to actually start looking into these things. And if you look into India, if you look into Vietnam, if you look into Mexico, they are still critically and crucially dependent on parts and materials coming from China. That's just like the reality.
When to do it, Sean? I've been thinking about that as you're speaking, and I think if you really plan a real exit for your business, whether it's an IPO or something else to a strategic, you need to be mindful of that. That like Mike was saying, if we do an IPO, people are asking these questions, and they want to. You need a plan. You don't necessarily. You need to be ready to go. Like, what are you going to do if? So China imports what, 20? I don't know. It was 10 or 20 million barrels of oil a day. The United States could actually probably stop about half of it, like right away, with its navy. So like there is that. There's so much risk out there. And even though we say, well, look, China, I actually think we have bigger problems than our own businesses if there's real like military issue with China. I think the problem is much bigger than that. But there's no question that everyone is talking about it. Everyone is asking about it. And if you intend to exit your business at any time in the next 5 years, you need to at least have a plan.
Totally.
Well, and to the point that Matt made earlier, if you know you're going to exit, this moves your multiple, right, Jason? Like somebody who has redundancy or kind of multiple streams where they can manufacture product, that's likely to turn into a direct financial outcome of a higher multiple, right?
Absolutely. There's no question it's going to have an effect on your multiple. And to Sean, Sean's credit, putting $2 million into U.S. manufacturing, I think that's a very wise move. And we are budgeting, bigger numbers for sure. Executing is another thing. There's Mexico, there's Vietnam. When we think about Vietnam, everyone's talking about Vietnam as a great spot, but they're still pretty close over there to China and subject to those issues there.
Yeah. I mean, Vietnam is a half measure. Like the parts will come from China, the materials might come from China, and you still have to put it on a boat. So I would really look at Rust Belt states. Like originally we were going to like buy an old auto parts manufacturer up in Wisconsin, and we were going to do that in 2020. But then the pandemic hit, and then they just started making like protective material, and they fucking are crushing it. So they do not want to make wallets for us anymore. That's where we would do the whole thing in Arizona. But you bring up worst case scenarios. Jason, I'm so glad you said this. It's like, dude, if we go to war with China, the last thing people are buying is wallets. It's like, dude, it's going to be so bad. And that's why I really don't think it happens. I think it's good to be risk adverse. I think it's good to have contingency plans. I think in the next 10 years, we will get chips manufacturing out of Taiwan. I think we will move that to America. And then I think we will let them have Taiwan. That's what I think happens. And people are like, well, I bring that up all the time. They're like, America lets them have Taiwan. What do you mean? I'm like, dude, Taiwan exists now because of the U.S. Navy. And like, it sucks, but like, that's the reality. I think it'll remerge back into mainland China. And that's how.
Look, the British gave back Hong Kong, right? I mean,
here's a crazy stat on that. Every 6 days, somebody celebrates independence from Britain. Every 6 days, there was like 61 independence from Britain holidays worldwide. That is how big the British Empire was. That is nuts.
Well, dude, I mean, I was just in England. That place sucks so bad. I totally get why you'd want to go take over the rest of the world. Dude, I was in Manchester, England, and it was like June 30th. It's summer, dude. It was raining and 50 degrees. And I was at an outdoor festival.
To our listeners in the UK, I love the UK. So don't let Sean alienate you. It's a special place.
It's really crazy. I posted a graphic somebody made about where millionaires are moving to and from. And the UK is hemorrhaging millionaires at a rate almost higher than anybody, higher than China. It was crazy. It was like proportionally, it's higher than any other country in the world that they're losing millionaires, that the wealthy are actually fleeing the UK right now. And I thought that was fascinating. I did not realize that was happening. And I'm not sure all the reasons for it, but it's obviously concerning when the most wealthy people in a society are opting out and saying, I think it'd be better for me somewhere else.
Mike, I'll tell you why. Very high taxes, and they do not charge on global income. So if you leave, you don't have to pay taxes. America doesn't work like that. If you choose to move to Mexico or move to Thailand or whatever.
Yeah, you're still, as long as you're an American citizen, right?
Yeah. And the UK doesn't have that. It's where you live. So if you move to Dubai, you pay zero fucking taxes.
Yeah, and as a side note, Dubai was like the one place, the UAE was the one place that was punching way above its weight where millionaires were moving.
Dude, and they're all coming from the UK.
You had inflows to places like,
but then you need to live in
places
Dubai.
like in China. China, the millionaire class leaves China too, which makes sense, right? In a place where your wealth or your assets at any point could be, seized by the state. If you can get out and get your assets out of China, you're going to do that. And this is the larger problem with China. Like I've looked at some research about foreign investment in China. And once you adjust the numbers, basically about 6, 7, 8 years ago, foreign investment in China stopped. That basically like external governments, corporations realized if we invest in China, it's a black hole. We'll never get that money back. China can nationalize. China can take over stuff. They'll use our assets to gain our IP or whatever. And so more or less the money dried up. People stopped pumping money into China. And you made the point earlier that like China, like the growth story is probably petering out. If you think about it like a stock that's had an unbelievable run and beaten earnings and grown and grown and grown for 10, 20 years, but now it's probably overvalued relative to what's in front of it. That's probably China. But part of what fueled that is you had so much money pouring into the country from outside. People aren't doing that anymore because they realize like, hey, that you're probably not getting those assets back.
All right, Jason, I appreciate you taking the lead on this episode. So if you hated it, you can just tweet at Jason. That's his. And if you loved it, you can just still tweet at me. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll end it there. Talk to you later.
Thanks,
we talked China. We talked politics. We talked the world at large. If you liked it, thanks for being here. If you hated it, then why'd you make it to the end, dude? You must have loved it. Thanks for listening to the Operators Podcast. Appreciate you being here. Thank you for Phil. Thank you, Northbeam. And thank you, brand new sponsor, Postscript. Goodbye.